Hi, I'm Teresa Coenen with Stitch and Tree Quilts, and this is row 2 of our quilt, COVID Friends Tribute Quilt. In row 2, we have 3 blocks that will be in the final quilt. I have included 5 block patterns with 2 alternates then for the row so that you can choose the blocks that have the most meaning to you. This month for row 2, I have included blocks for Faith Forever, which is representation of how our faith has forever been changed and challenged as we have been shut out of churches during the COVID crisis. The second block that I've chosen for the row is Hero Love. And so that is a block that celebrates the unsung heroes that have come to the forefront during the COVID crisis, and also represents that heart-shaped symbol that we see so often in the media and on news sources in order to give the heroes some of the credit for the work that they've done during the COVID pandemic. The third block is called Baby Bunting, and that's to represent the babies who've come into the world through the COVID pandemic in a very different way than what their parents or grandparents had planned. You know, baby showers have been postponed or delayed or canceled completely. Lamaze classes have been of no use because parents aren't allowed to have Lamaze partners with them in the birthing room. Grandparents don't get to see the babies. It changes quite a bit. And also there's the sad tales of those babies that suffered very greatly from COVID at the early time of their life. That was a block to represent the celebrations that have changed. So the alternates that go with that would be Mortar Board that represents both high school and college graduations. And then also Big Day that is to represent weddings and anniversaries, events such as that have either been postponed, changed, amended in some way because of the pandemic. I'm doing my quilt in 4 colorations. So for each of the different blocks, you will see examples of bright batiks, deep and rich batiks, bright blenders, and deep and rich blenders. If you have any questions along the way, give me a call, send me an email, do a post on our group Facebook page, and we'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can to answer any questions that you might have. I thank you for joining us and have a blessed day. Well, hello everyone. I'm Teresa Coenen with Stitch and Tree Quilts, and this is month 2 of our COVID Friends Quilt Along. Now in month 1, I ran a video of month 1, and I had all of the blocks put together in the video, which makes it a very, very long video. For month 2, you'll find that I have a separate video for each one of the blocks. That way, if there's something specific that you want to take another look at, you'll be able to do that by just looking at specifically of those videos. So you'll see several videos that are posted up for month 2. So I'd like to start out, if we could please, with any kind of show and tell. If anybody has show and tell, what you would need to do first is unmute your microphone and then show us your block that you have. And if there's anything special, like if the fabric meant something special to you or the block itself meant something special, take that time and share it if you will. Anybody have some show and tell?
Well, I'll start.
Oh, Vicki, that's nice.
Chinese lantern, which gave me an absolute fit. And actually, I did redo it several times. Here is my Big Apple.
Oh, lovely.
Which I don't know how I did that paper piecing, but somehow it came out with the leaf on the reverse side. But you know what? That's okay, because with COVID, nothing that you know, anything is possible. Everything was all messed up. So let me see, what is this? Pandora's Box, which I really like that block. And I also went ahead and did the Red Cross, and all of them were very significant for me. So I just decided I'm going to do them all, and I don't know what size the quilt will end up being, but oh well.
So Vicki, just so you know, I'm going to design, or I'm going to come up with an alternate pattern that's going to be for a table runner or a bed runner, so I can use my leftover blocks as well, because I too am having a hard time deciding what goes in and what stays out.
It's yeah, I really enjoy it. I have never made blocks this large. And so I had to get a pizza box an extra large pizza box to put the blocks in. And of course, I couldn't put the white strips on because then they would just be too big. So
Yeah, as a setting, they are quite a large block. And I'm going to apologize about that Chinese lantern. It is a booger. It has all those little itty bitty corners, and it is just a tough little block. Our blocks this month are much, much easier compared to last month's blocks.
yeah, right.
Does anybody else have any show and tell for us?
Can you hear me now?
There you go.
Okay. This is row 2, which I made since Saturday. I decided to put in isolation since that's what's affected myself personally. I live in a retirement community. Faith forever.
Oh, that's lovely.
I have a question. Will you be giving any help on how to handle the large size bias strips on the half square triangles, and also any hand quilting ideas?
Arlene, so you're asking about the large square, half squares that'll be in the setting?
Yes.
Yes, when we get to that, I'll give you some tips on how we can keep that nice and square. Because they are large and they'll grow on you if you're not careful. As far as hand quilting, I'm going to post that out on, I haven't thought about hand quilting. I haven't gotten as far as even think about quilting yet. But I'll post that out on our website, and hopefully on our Facebook page, we'll have some other hand quilters that might have some good ideas on how these units can get quilted.
Good.
Do we have any other show and tell?
I do.
Good, Janice, go ahead.
Okay, this is my Chinese lantern. It was a bugger, but I got it. They're right here and I can't get a hold of them. My apple was fun. And my Pandora's box. And then I did do the cross, but I didn't do it in the setting because I'm not sure if I'm going to use that as an extra block or not. There's certain ones I definitely want, and then I'm going to pick which ones I want to add to it. And then I like the idea of the bed, like a bed skirt or, you know, end a thing. And I was thinking of putting them on the back, the ones I don't use, putting them on the back. So
that's a good idea also. That's a good idea.
You know, set them in the setting.
Well, thanks for sharing.
You're welcome. It's been fun.
And you're right that your Chinese lantern looked really cute, but you're right, that one is a booger.
I ended up cutting just a little bit off that top and bottom part of it to really make it fit right. And then I just sewed a little bit shorter seams on each side so I didn't cut off the corners.
So I told one of the quilters that was in the shop that it's very much like a true Chinese lantern that actually kind of expands and contracts, it seems, because of how many little pieces there are and because of the diagonal. So it's very, very much like that. So does anybody else have something to share?
Well, I don't have the blocks, but I have the beginnings of my 9-patch. I am in the fabric strips exchange, so I'll be getting those fairly soon. And I'm doing 2. One's going to probably be a wall hanging, and that will have probably just about every block in it. And then the ones that have the yellow will get the 9 patches, and the others that will be everything. I've got the star points started here in a bunch of different colors. These are from the strips that I saved back so I could have some of my fabric in mine. So.
Well, thanks for sharing, Christine. Anybody else have anything to share? Okay, well, if we have no other shares, I'm going to go ahead and get started with our blocks for today. Our very first block is called Faith Forever. And as you all very well know, typically in any time of a crisis, we turn to church, whether it's a war, whether it's a catastrophe, a tornado, a sudden death in our community, the death of somebody that's important, you know, we turn to church. And this was a case where we can't turn to church because we can't go to church. And so people had to figure out different ways to maintain their faith and grow in their faith at this time. So that's why I chose the Faith Forever block, and I chose a cross to represent it. So within this quilt, we have 8 colors that we have encouraged quilters to collect or exchange. We have red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, turquoise, and pink, or teal and rose if you're going for dark and rich colors. So as you're constructing your blocks, we all have our favorite colors, or we have blocks that sometimes lend themselves to a specific color. But one of the things that I need to challenge you to do is to make sure that your block centers represent all 8 of those colorways. For example, if you just happen to really love red and it ends up in most of your blocks, but not all of your blocks, when you finish your quilt, you might have a difficult time getting them arranged in such a way so that they look nice. For example, in row 1, we had a big apple. Apples tend to be red, unless you happen to have a green apple. And we had the red cross. It tends to be red, unless you're getting very artistic. But in row 2, we have something called Hero Love, and it also is red. So you need to make sure that if we're already using 2 red blocks in our quilt, and there's 9 blocks total, that the other 8 blocks have to represent the other colors. So as I finish my first row, I can look and I can see I have red, orange, I was missing yellow, green, blue, violet, I was missing turquoise, and I have a pink. So in my second row, I've introduced turquoise, and I'll make sure I introduce yellow. So those are some things to keep in mind as you're doing your quilt, is you want to make sure that you're using your fabrics and your colors and you're moving them throughout your quilt. That's also why you don't see my blocks set yet. And that's because I'm kind of picky, and I know that as I come down towards the end of it, I'll know better what colors I need to have. For example, once I know the order of my block centers, I'll step back, I'll put them on the design wall, and I will determine where do I need another pop of turquoise, or where do I need another pop of purple. And that's how I'll decide that that's the color of the star setting I'm going to do. It can be a challenge, and not that it's bad to go ahead and set them as you go. Just know that possibly you might be moving your blocks around in the quilt to get your colors moved around in such a way that it turns out the way you like it. And block 5 is Hero Love. You know, we see this symbol all the time now. We see it, people standing outside of hospitals for loved ones. When you can't get to see somebody at the nursing home, we just show them a sign of love. You see it on professional sports players are doing it, and I love it. They're just showing love all the time. And there are a lot of heroes in this whole COVID case, and there's a lot of sad stories related to the heroes. And it's not just the health professionals, but it's all the other heroes that make things continue to work. We're all at home right now, and we're ordering like crazy online because we can't go shopping. Well, someone's got to deliver all those packages. And that UPS man or that FedEx personnel, they're taking a lot of risks to get from here to there. And someone's got to work at those places where all this is being shipped. And there's the grocery store, and there's the nursing homes, and there's the emergency responders. There are so many different heroes of people that probably never dreamed when they went into the profession that they went into, that they potentially could be risking their life in order to provide a service for others. So that's one of the things to think about, and I know that we oftentimes don't get the opportunity to thank those people, but I've been trying to be really kind to the Amazon, to the UPS guy and the FedEx guy as they keep making stops at my place. So just so you know, as a 6.5-inch little heart block, that's a sweet block to make. And it makes a really cute little baby quilt just to cut up your scraps into these sizes of units and just make a little quilt full of hearts. It's an adorable little quilt to give. So then we get to the third block of the row. And in the third block of the row, this is when life gets interrupted. And I initially wrote this as a baby bunting. And you know, it's funny because we tend to like stay in our own little worlds. And I wrote this because we had a friend who was going to have their first grandchild. And the rest of us have, you know, we've all got grandchildren up into high school already. And this is their first, and they are so looking forward to it. But this baby was going to be due on the 30th of June. And all of a sudden, there's no baby showers. There's no Limoise class. There's all of this that they thought that they were going to do. It kind of all just went away. And so that's why I initially wrote the block Baby Bunting. Now, I'm also the school board president here in town. And so as it turned out, we also had graduation totally interrupted. No school, no graduation. We couldn't even figure out how to do it in June. We were so concerned about COVID. We didn't even do a graduation in June. We did ours at it was about the second week of July, we did graduation, and it was outdoors. So we had a lot of people whose lives were completely interrupted. Then Pat, who pattern tests with me, she had 2 weddings of her grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and one with her daughter that was supposed to be scheduled for this summer. And all of those had gotten postponed. In addition to that, I have an aunt and uncle who were having a major anniversary, and that got postponed. So life got postponed. And what I wrote about in the pattern was a lot about what goes on with us when major life celebrations just kind of drop off and now become no celebration at all. So let's start with the baby bunting. Out of all the blocks that we have, it's probably the most challenging one because it's dealing with small half squares, but it's nothing as challenging as that Chinese lantern from row 1. The next one is going to be a piece of cake. Speaking of cake, it'd be graduation cake because it's the mortar board. So whether it's a graduation from college or a graduation from high school, we had tens of thousands of young people that didn't get to have that ceremony. And what happens is, in the whole scheme of things, they realize it's not really important. So they end up having this guilty feeling that they made a big deal about their graduation, and it should be a big deal. It's a rite of passage. For hundreds of years, we've had graduation ceremonies, and now all of a sudden we just didn't have one. So mortar board is a block that looks like the mortar board that you wear on your head for graduation, and this is the part that sits on your head. You can see here, I did that block twice. I needed some oranges, so I did this one in orange, but when I finished the block, I wasn't in love with it. So I did it again with turquoise because I needed some turquoises, and I like this block better. When we finish the quilt completely, I'm going to add a tassel to my mortar board. So I'm going to use some embroidery floss and create a tassel and add it to my mortar board. I'm still not sure which one of these 2 blocks will end up in my quilt. But this is a great place to add some fabrics that you want to include. So for example, if your school colors were purple and gold, you might choose a purple and gold mortar board. Any questions on mortar board? It is a very easy little block.
Teresa,
And I like the looks of it.
Teresa, could that be altered a little bit to turn it into a mask block? Because the mask block looks like
We have a mask block that's going to be in our 3rd row, so we will have one.
All right.
Trust me, that is something we can't do without. So you bet, you bet. Our last block is big day. So whether it was a wedding or whether it was an anniversary, it was a big day that we planned for. And you know, these events that we have, they don't just happen overnight. If you are planning a wedding, you probably are planning it over a year in advance. You're getting your venue, you're lining up all of your big providers, your photographer, your cake, you've ordered a dress, and then COVID hits and the venue is closed and the church is closed and you can't have your wedding the way you thought you had your wedding, and you've got this mega dress that is at the dress shop still that you have fittings to do for. But why would you even bother to do the fittings if you can't even get together and have a wedding? It's just really been a shock. And so with big day, I've chosen a bow tie to represent big day. That way it could represent a wedding or it could represent an anniversary, either one. And you can do what you like. I know that Pat, that pattern tested with me, she's the one that missed out on 3 weddings. She included fabric from all 3 of the weddings that she had made things for. So one of the wedding colors was blue, one of the wedding colors was red, and one was purple. Her bow tie was purple, and her center on the inside was a little 4X that was in red and blue. And each of it had fabrics that she'd put together for a quilt for the couple that she made it for. So I know that has a lot of special meaning for her. So I know I said that I give one alternate for every row, and I'm just going to apologize in advance. I couldn't do graduation without doing the wedding. So we'll just have to decide what's the most important to you and what tells your COVID story. In our next row, in our last row, we're going to have a block about, it's called the Anvil of Oppression, and it is about the Black Lives Matter movement, which, while it is not caused by COVID, some of the aggression that we've seen and experienced has been a result of that. We'll also have a mask, we'll have a friendship star, and we'll have an isolation block. So we'll have 4 blocks in that last row that right now, that's what I'm planning. I'm trying to think of something to do related to politics, and I'm not really sure how I want to include that. Just know that as you're piecing, if you're using your little 9 patches as your beginning and enders units, you're creating quite a nice little collection like I have here of pieces, and it's a great opportunity. But keep in mind also, you want to look for balance of all your colors. Again, we tend to have our favorites. So if I only picked out my favorites, all these blocks would be blue. And then I'd have a very blue quilt. So I make sure that when I make these units that I'm trying to keep a balance of red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, pink, and turquoise. And that way I have all 8 colors incorporated into my quilt. Any questions on that last block, the big day, or any questions on the row or the quilt itself?
Teresa, I have a question. One of the things that has really impacted me during the self-isolation period was the inability to have funerals. And I was wondering if you had given consideration to doing some type of block to represent that, or which of the blocks that we will have might be good ones to represent deaths.
That's a very good point, Vicki. Maybe I will go ahead in row 4 and offer up an alternative in row 4 for they.
Vicki, I'm putting, my mother-in-law died at the day before, July 3rd, and I chose to include her funeral, which was streamed live, and only family in masks attended the funeral. But I'm putting it with my cross.
Ah.
I figured she did not die from COVID, and I think that's a great idea to put, if she had died from COVID, I certainly would have put her under hero, but she died of natural causes. She was 93, and so I'm putting her with the cross in my story.
That's
But
good idea. Thank you, Sharon.
You're welcome. I wanted to show a couple other, I know you were mentioning that, you, Vicki, our hostess was mentioning what to include politics under. And there were a couple things, a lot of these today did not fit my story. So I am creating I don't know if you can see that or not. I'm sorry, I must have hit the button. Okay. I'm doing a schoolhouse because that has really affected me with my grandkids. So I came up with a foundation piece. We'll see how it goes. I haven't started it yet. I just drew it out. But another one that I think could fit with your politics is I'm doing a closed sign. And I'm going to do it blue and white and then I'm going to applique the word closed on. And I'm tying in the unemployment, the shops closing, the small businesses going out of business. I'm kind of putting all of that together and the reopening of things. And then one other thing that I didn't feel has been touched upon is death, is the number of deaths in our country, as well as poisons that have been preached to help people. And in fact, they weren't unscientifically put out to the country. So my skull and crossbones are covering the poisons that have been brought forward, whereas my skull, and what I did was I just printed this off on my computer. So again, it was another technique. I figured it's, not quilting per se, but it was another way to get something in. And instead of doing just a regular skull, I thought if I can go with something like with Cinco de Mayo, something that's got a little bit of life to it, it wouldn't be such a downer on the quilt, although it is, but it needed to be brought forth. So that's all.
Those are all very good ideas, Sharon. And Christine puts in the chat room for the deceased to also maybe include it on the hero love block and choose a favorite color or the color that the deceased person a favorite color of that person. There's a lot of ways, there's just so many ways to personalize this quilt. And that's one of the things I'm going to love about it, is that when it's all said and done, everybody's quilt should mean something to them. And that's what's most important. So Sharon, I'm glad that you shared those things. I know that we have a couple of gals in Kansas who also are doing some applique on some specific blocks, and I loved your closed block. That's really good. I wish when I first conceived of this, I was trying to think of a fewer number of blocks, and in hindsight, I wish I would have done many blocks, because there's so many that we could include. There's just so many things that if I don't write down these memories, I'm afraid I'll lose them. And that someday when a grandchild or great-grandchild asks me about this, I will lose this. And
one other thing I just thought I'd show you is share is that I'm planning on the back of my quilt, because just because I do a quilt doesn't mean I'm going to remember to pass this along or remember the story. So I'm going to type it up in the back, and I'm planning on doing like 2 sheets. And so it'd be kind of like a large label in the back, but I'm going to print it and attach it to the back of the quilt, and it will explain each of my squares and tell my family's story.
that's a very good idea.
So 100 years
That's a
from
very
now,
good idea.
last, they can read a true story of a family going through the pandemic.
That's right. Now, did anybody watch the Emmys last night? Is it the Emmys? Is that what it was? The TV show awards. I don't watch them, but I was painting, and so I was listening. And Tyler Perry received an award called the Governor's Award, and it's about his overall achievement and what he's given to the industry. And Tyler Perry got up in front of the microphone to do his acceptance speech of this, and he told a story of a quilt. So if you didn't watch the Emmys, do look up Tyler Perry's acceptance speech on YouTube, because it was about a quilt that when he graduated from high school and was out on his own, his grandma gave him a quilt, and he didn't appreciate the quilt. And when he needed to wash the dog, he dried the dog off with the quilt. And when he needed to change the oil in the car, he threw the quilt underneath the car to sap up the oil. And years later, as he became an adult, he was walking past kind of an elite antique store, and he saw a beautiful quilt hanging in the window. And he thought, wow, that looks a lot like my granny's quilt. And he went inside just, to see how much do you get for something like that. And the lady said, let me tell you, this quilt has a story. And she started to tell the story of all the different blocks in the quilt. And the quilt owner that made it, their mother had been a slave. And so Tyler Perry ended up telling about how sad he was that he had not valued the work of his grandmother and the stories, and he never took the opportunity to learn the stories in the quilt that she had given him. And so Sharon's idea of putting this label on the back is a very important thing, because it's the stories that you have. If you're adding a fabric in that's from your wedding dress or from a baptismal gown or something like that, or something that you've made for somebody else, those stories are what makes your quilt unique and makes it so personal to you and to anybody else who ever looks at that. Anybody else have anything to add for the good of the cause today?
Well, I have a question for Sharon.
Sure.
I have a question for Sharon. Sharon, your skull and crossbones and your information about the blocks, are you planning on putting fabric through your computer's inkjet computer to do that? There, you can buy that stuff ready to go at Joann's, I know.
Yeah, but you know what else you can do? You can take just your fabric.
Yeah. Just fabric without treating
and a piece of yeah, I don't treat mine. I will iron it afterwards with a hot iron after it's sat for a couple hours, and but with a pressing sheet on top. Yeah. Just to make sure I don't get, if any ink does bleed, it'll go on with a pressing sheet. But you have to make the fabric firm to put it through your inkjet or your laser, whatever, to get the paper fabric to go through. Mm-hmm. So you take a piece of freezer paper and you iron your fabric onto the waxy. The shiny side of your freezer paper, and then you got to make sure it's all the way out to the edges. You don't have extra sticking out, and then you run that right through your inkjet.
You're lucky you're in an area where you can actually find that. That's quite the hunt to find freezer paper in my neck of the woods.
No, Christine, if you don't have freezer paper, you can use a cardstock that you just spray baste your fabric to your cardstock and run that through your machine as well.
Okay, good to know. I'll probably buy it from Joann's because it's designed to go through there. But okay, thanks.
Be careful. Some of that paper that you the printable paper you buy can be pretty stiff. Make sure you don't get the iron-on kind, because then it's got an adhesive behind it, and it makes it kind of funky instead of really part of the quilt.
I have found that of the fabrics that you can run through your printer, my favorite that I like to use is called Jacquard, Jacquard. It's not the most expensive one on the market, but it is probably one of the highest quality fabrics, and it prints with the best resolution as far as when you print it and you put it out. I'll type it into the chat so people can see the name of it.
The other thing you can use, and I found, is the Terrell Magic, which if you take your white fabric or whatever fabric you're using, and you just dampen that piece, let it sit outside and dry, and then iron it, and it is just like a piece of paper. I mean, it works fabulously. In fact, I've done both the freezer paper. I've had rolls of paper that is specific for printing. And I think this is actually my favorite method.
Thank you, Aubrey. That was a very good suggestion. You guys are great. Well, I'm going to tell you to go out, stay safe, wear your mask, protect everybody. You all have a wonderful week and a month, and I'll see you back here next month, and we'll do our last row. Thanks so much, everybody.